Mic check 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Check check 1 2 3 4. Okay. Hope you're having a good Monday, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Lots and lots of good news to talk about this week weather-wise, and it's going to be a pleasant change of pace in terms of some drier weather. And also, if it has been a little bit too warm for your liking, we have plenty of cooler temperatures that are going to arrive, along with some drier air, and that's really going to be the focal point of your forecast. That's really going to lead to our dry stretch and really inhibit those rain chances. We have a good stretch of days where we actually don't have any rain chances whatsoever. And it's very opportune because it comes after all of this rain that we've gotten over a 5-day stretch. Some areas up here around Butts County, northern Monroe County, maybe about 3 or 5 inches of rain in some spots. The lowest point that I could find over in Thomaston, just shy of an inch of rain, but we had some localized areas that got a whole lot more than that. About 5.5 inches in central Twiggs County, 6.6 in the northern edge of Houston County, so just north of Warner Robins in the Centerville area, going into 8.5 inches of rain in Wilkinson County, 7.6 down in Macon County, just shy of 7 inches as you go to the southern edge of Telfair County, and then just shy of 7 inches once again right here on the corner of Toombs County and getting into areas like Jeff Davis County down just to the south of us here in central Georgia. So most areas probably found themselves in the range of about 1 to 2, maybe even 3 inches of rain over this 5-day period, but we had some areas that even got a couple of flash flood warnings in light of some of these heavy rainfall totals. That's what happens when you get a lot of rain in a short period of time. This may not have even really included 3 out of these 5 days. It was just really one day where a majority of these totals probably fell. But let's zoom in on Middle Georgia Regional Airport because this is obviously where we get our precipitation observations is what I was trying to say right there. 4.5 inches of rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. You can see that the gradient gets darker the farther down Airport Drive that you go. So we had some pretty substantial amounts, even a flash of pink, which is going to be upwards to about 7 or 8 inches just a couple miles away from Middle Georgia Regional Airport. But this is a pretty substantial amount to add to our totals that we've seen so far in the month of August. So yes, we had a bit of a dry stretch towards the beginning of last week, but then take a look at that. We followed it up with 4 days that we recorded rainfall. Sunday, the 24th, was not too impressive in the way of rain. We only got about 0.03 of an inch. Most of this rain did fall on Friday, where we clocked about 3 inches of rain. I think that's definitely the highest total that we've seen over one day in the month of August. But it just continues to tell the story about what has been a very wet month of August so far after we had a pretty dry month of July. So in total, we are just shy of 10 inches of rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. Of course, that's just one area. It doesn't cover all of central Georgia, but I do imagine many areas are well above average for this time of year because average for August, I realize I have been showing the wrong number on this. I did some digging and I had to update this number. I had the average for the month of September, which was just over 3 inches of rain. So on average, we typically get about 4 inches, 4 and maybe 1/4 of an inch of rain in the month of August all time. But we still have been well above that mark for quite some time now. And we're not too far off this record. 2004, we got just over 12.5 inches of rain in the month of August. We still have probably about a week left in the month of August. So can we see that number get up close to it? Well, it's really going to be dependent on the rain chances that we do have for the next week, and there's not going to be too many of them to come by. We do have some chances that we maybe could see some widespread rain and add maybe about an inch or two to this total that we already have. So we'll see if we get close to that record. Right now, I would put more money on us falling shy of that record, which should not be a bad thing. Because yes, there are definitely, or we've seen a swing over the past 4 months here in central Georgia. We got off to a relatively normal start. It was obviously trending dry, but maybe about an inch and a half or just shy of 2 inches below where we should have been for the month of January and February. And both of those months are typically on the drier end of things during the winter season. And if you remember January, obviously we had our fair share of snow that did fall. So obviously we just had the frozen form of water, not necessarily the liquid form. And I would say January was probably a pretty wet month when you add up all the snow totals that we did have and all that snowpack that had to eventually melt. March and April were barely above average, so just around a ½ inch above average for both of those months. And then May and June got us off to a very wet stretch. It was a very wet May. It was a very wet June. And honestly, saying very wet, like we have been talking about this for quite some time. May and June were definitely very wet months, but then July was actually an abnormally dry month here in central Georgia. Well, I don't know if I can really classify these as very wet or very dry when you compare it to the box that we have for August now. Over 6 inches above where we should be at this point in the month of August, and that puts us in total just shy of 8 inches above average for the entire year of 2025. We have a very substantial cushion. We could go into maybe in October like we did have last year. Remember, Hurricane Helene came through and we didn't record rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport for almost a month's time. We could go into a stretch like that with the cushion that we are sitting above average now. We would probably like to get that number down just a tad, but overall, I think we are all going to be pleased with the forecast that I have to tell you about. But I had to recap the very dreary and rainy stretch that we have just continued to have all throughout the month of August. We've had dreary stretch, and then we've maybe had a bit of a drier stretch, but we are going to have some very pleasant weather because a front currently moving through central Georgia. It's been making some pretty slow progress throughout this morning, but we are going to start to feel the impacts of it in the form of drier air later this afternoon. And then as we go into tomorrow morning, we're definitely going to feel the cooler air associated with that. So lots of cooler and drier air. It's a pretty strong front for this time of year. I've been saying it all morning long. It's pretty uncharacteristic to get a front that ushers in this much cooler air and this much drier air during the end of August. We're normally used to holding on to that humidity even well into the month of September. So it's obviously going to be a very, very welcome change and a bit of a very premature false fall. Normally false fall comes sometime in September, maybe even as late as the beginning of October, but we're actually going to have false fall pretty early, about a month before the official season does start. So the mornings are mainly going to be the time that you are feeling like fall. As we go into the afternoons, I wouldn't quite classify it as fall personally because the temperatures are still a little bit too warm for that. However, it is going to be paired up with drier air, so the numbers that you will see forecasted are actually going to feel like the numbers forecasted. They're not going to feel 5 or 8 or 10 degrees warmer in light of the very humid atmosphere. So it will be a very pleasant change of pace. Here's a look at your numbers right now. And obviously you don't see probably about 60% of central Georgia on this temperature graphic. It does look like now we have numbers down in Cordele. So I think we have an issue with the graphic system that we're trying to resolve right now, or maybe just a lot of rain over the weekend did mess up the sensors at all of these observation stations. But starting out in the upper 70s, some low 80s right now, definitely not as warm as we could be on a typical summertime day. Maybe 3 weeks ago, we were seeing numbers that were already pretty close to 90 degrees at this time. So pick out where the cooler air is, and yes, it is to the north of us. You can see widespread green shades. Only 64 degrees up in Indianapolis, 67 in Lexington, 65 up in St. Louis, 72 in Nashville. So you can see that as you go down towards the south and the southeast, there's still our fair share of warm temperatures down here in southeast Georgia, getting into the state of Florida and coastal areas of the Carolinas, and maybe a little bit up there in Virginia Beach. But you can see still plenty of upper 70s in these areas, and our neighbors over here at Montgomery and Jackson, 73 and 78 degrees respectively. So yes, we're starting to feel the impacts of this front and showing you that this cooler and drier air mass is present to the north of us, and that will continue to follow in behind our frontal boundary. So the warmest temperature actually that we can completely see in the eastern half of the United States is 87 in New Orleans, but everyone else is probably about 4 degrees shy of that. So they're really holding on to the humidity and the toe of the boot down in Louisiana, but everyone else does feel maybe a bit more pleasant than it has been over recent days. Here's a look at the winds and the wind gusts. We'll be continuing to keep an eye on these over the course of today, but right now a steady breeze building in from the north and the northwest behind our frontal boundary, and you can see maybe 6 to 7 miles per hour at the most. We will have some breezy conditions later on today, and we'll get into that when I talk about the future view winds. So right on par with our average low yesterday, we kicked it off at 70 degrees up here in Macon. Only got to 87 degrees for an actual temperature, but if you walked outside yesterday, you know the humidity was definitely making it feel a whole lot warmer. And we also had our fair share of scattered rain and cloud cover in the picture, so that's what really kept those numbers below average yesterday, but definitely didn't feel like it. The humidity was making for feels like numbers above that 91 degree mark. 103, the record back in 1968. It is very refreshing to not be flirting with these numbers. However, we're going to keep a very close eye on this record low over the next couple of days. 58, the record low for yesterday back in 1957. We very well could have some upper 50s in our forecast as you're walking out the door for the next couple of mornings, giving you a bit of a precursor and a little bit of an alluding to what some of our temperatures are going to be. We already talked about the rain, but 3/100ths of an inch, of rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport puts our year departure over 7.5 inches above where we should be at this point in the year. Sunrise now at 7:04 and the sunset is at 8:09. So we're going to get very, very close to having our first 8 p.m. sunset in quite some time. And then after that, the sun is going to begin to set as we get late into the 7 o'clock hour. So yes, those days are getting shorter and shorter. Got to milk out all the sunlight that you can until we get into those very short days as we go into the fall and the winter. So some morning shower chances, they were very, very slim. I had about a 10% chance, and I highlighted the morning on the 7-day this morning, and I don't think anyone's really even seen anything in the way of rain since maybe about 3 or 4 o'clock early this morning. Then we're going to transition into a dry afternoon, which is already looking like it's going to kind of ensue, and we'll take a look at the satellite and radar in just a moment. But mostly sunny conditions, breezy conditions out of the north and the northwest, and occasional gusts up to 20 miles per hour could be possible. And a high temperature of 90 today. So yes, we're still on the warmer side. This front is currently moving through, but it's still going to take a while for that cooler air to usher in, but not necessarily the drier air. That's going to make an appearance a little bit before some of that cooler air, because you can see the heat indices today somewhere right there around what the actual temperature is, 91, 92 maybe at the most. And that's going to be the case for most of central Georgia. I think you could see some heat indices possibly in the mid-90s the farther south and southeast that you live. That's just because it's going to be those areas that are last to start feeling some of that cooler and drier air. But farther up to the northwest, up here in Macon, we're definitely going to feel the impacts of it a little bit earlier. So here's your satellite and radar picture. You obviously see your fair share of light green on here, and that's what we call backscatter, picking up on what I think were a lot of bugs this morning because we still held on to the humidity and you're picking up on non-meteorological elements, but we're still not seeing anything in the way of rain and really nothing in the way of cloud cover anymore whatsoever. Let's take a look at the state of Georgia as a whole. Maybe one lone shower down there in very, very far South Georgia. Otherwise, we are continuing to kind of see the motion of everything go kind of down towards the south and the southeast. Obviously, the general direction of the cloud cover is going towards the east, but the boundary is going to continue to push down towards the south and east. So it's going to kind of be a fine line about which areas are going to still have their pop-up shower and storm chances, and then which areas are going to be completely dry with mostly sunny skies. So let's go into future view. I put a pause point here in the afternoon, and obviously nothing really worth noting here in central Georgia, but you can see rain chances, mainly just some scattered showers, couldn't even rule out a storm or two, popping up farther along towards the east and the southeast as you make your way down I-16 closer to I-95. That's where the boundary is going to continue to move through, and we got very fortunate with this boundary because we probably would have had our fair share of scattered rain chances if this boundary came through during the afternoon hours, but it came through during a cooler portion of the morning hours when our temperatures weren't as high, didn't have as much to work with as it does during that prime daytime heating time frame about 3, 4, and 5 o'clock. We continue into the nighttime hours tonight, and we are still rain-free here in central Georgia. You can see these wind arrows. They're a little bit longer, but not necessarily yellow in color, so not the gustiest winds ever, but it is probably going to make for a bit of a bad hair day at times. It's going to be quite breezy this afternoon. We'll kick off Tuesday morning mostly clear, and as we go into Tuesday afternoon, not even seeing those scattered light green dots that we're normally so used to seeing this time of year. We have some days that we're really confident that we're not going to have too much rain, but we still throw a 10% on there just to cover the bases, given that we have warm temperatures, we have humidity in the forecast. So this really shows you how uncharacteristic and really how strong this front is for this time of year, going all the way through a day without even seeing those green dots pop up whatsoever. Now let's continue it into Wednesday. Yeah, why stop there on Tuesday? You might see a few minuscule green dots. I've still elected to go without a rain chance on Wednesday. We'll continue to see what the forecast is looking like, or what the model runs, I guess you could say, are looking like. But I really think that dry air is just going to take over, and that's what's going to really be the dominating force with our forecast. Obviously, our temperatures will still be on the warmer end, but they're going to be below average. I don't think it's going to be quite enough to even work with for a couple of scattered showers. But if we continue to see a little bit of consistency, I might throw a 10% on there just to cover the bases. But the main thing that you need to know is you're not going to see rain over the next 3 days. Very, very, very unlikely. And if you do catch anything, it's going to be a very short-lived, and it's going to be a very isolated light shower at the very most. So that is going to be very good news. I would put more money on you just remaining dry over the next couple of days as opposed to receiving maybe one of those light showers, but we'll continue to see if that's even going to come to fruition. Here's a look at Monday afternoon, or later this afternoon, rather, I should say. You'll see some occasionally breezy conditions, upwards to maybe 15, 20 miles per hour. And along with that, we go into Tuesday. Still a bit of a steady breeze. We're not seeing the gustiest winds ever, not even really any shades of yellow that creep into central Georgia. And then by the time we get into Wednesday afternoon, we should see that breeze kind of wane off and fade out of the picture. But overall, this afternoon just going to be indicative of that boundary actually coming through. So that's why there might be some slightly breezier conditions for today. So I had that 10% chance of rain this morning. I think the rest of today is going to be scot-free in terms of not dealing with anything in the way of rain. 90 for a high today, but then we go to Tuesday. It doesn't seem like that much of a drop, 86 as compared to 90, but it is going to feel a whole lot different in the fact that we might have no humidity present whatsoever. So we're talking dew point temperatures in the 50s. I believe that's the next graphic I have to show you is future view humidity. Like I said, the current conditions right now are a little bit iffy, or I'd be able to show you the dew point temperatures map, but that's not populating whatsoever. We're still trying to work out those kinks. Note the morning lows. This is something we haven't talked about too much as of recently, because every day during the summertime months starts out somewhere in the low 70s, maybe the mid to upper 70s, and you're feeling the humidity as you walk out the door. That will not be the case. 60 degrees for a low temperature not only on Tuesday, but once again on Wednesday. And that's kind of a middle ground high temperature too, because areas farther down to the south and the southeast are probably going to hover somewhere maybe a 62, 63. But the farther north and northwest that you live, you might have some 50s on the temperature map to kickstart tomorrow morning and Wednesday morning. The North Georgia mountains actually have forecasted lows near 49 degrees. Yes, at the end of August. So this is just a crazy cold front, and I'm very excited for it because I, for one, do love the fall season. I'm tired of the heat and humidity. I would like some more pleasant feeling weather. When you get some mornings starting out near the 50s and then those afternoon highs in the 70s, that is just picture perfect weather in my opinion. But then we continue into Wednesday, high temperatures somewhere in the mid 80s. That's why I'm hesitant to call it a little bit of a false fall. Yes, it will be paired up with the drier air. It will feel a lot more pleasant outside. But high temperatures in the mid 80s are still going to be a bit too warm for fall. Once you get those temperatures, or at least the high temperatures down somewhere in the 70s, that's where I would be more confident in calling it a fall. But I think the mornings are definitely going to be the time frame that you do feel some of that fall-like weather. Starting out around 60 degrees paired up with virtually no humidity, maybe even the upper 50s for some areas. Make sure to have a light jacket ready, especially if you live in areas like Monroe County, Jasper County, Upson County. You guys farther up to the north and the northwest will probably have your fair share of upper 50s, maybe even some mid 50s in the forecast. So a very, very crazy change of pace as we get into the last official week of the month of August. But we'll talk about your afternoon highs a little bit past that window. So we go into Thursday and Friday. still hanging out in the mid 80s, and then another drop, 82 as we go into Friday. Now I think that temperature drop is going to be as a result of widespread cloud cover and some rain chances in the forecast, but we're still trying to fine tune that. We'll pop it over to the long range models eventually, but we'll talk about the humidity day by day. And like I told you, we'll already see that drop begin today. So down at least in the light green area, and this is what we have been searching for in the summertime, just for some form of relief. At least it's not super swampy and sticky. This is a little bit more bearable. But then we go down into the comfortable range. Yes, it is very uncommon to see dew point temperatures in the 50s. That's going to be your areas of no color whatsoever on those dew point graphics that we show you. So we started out around 69, maybe 68 degrees this morning, which is already a pretty pleasant start. But there you go, down into the low 60s, right near 60 degrees before Friday. We are trending a little bit warmer, but still 65 degrees. That's still an amazing start to the day. Every single one of these morning lows is going to be below average of 70 degrees, which we typically see this time of year. So this gives us a pretty good depiction about where the front currently is. I still kind of have a dividing line of humidity, but this isn't populating on our current conditions graphic. You will see that the dark green color gets pushed farther and farther, over to the Atlantic coast. And then what's to follow even behind this light green, which dew point temperatures of 61, that is already a treat. We just continue to see that area of no color build into the forecast. And we'll have some areas and some shades of that light green, but overall, it does look like we'll have plenty of dew point temperatures that are flashing up in the 50s. See, right there, widespread light green right there, 54 degrees. And it is worth noting this is a prediction from the model run. This is a prediction from the graph model. So Wednesday at 5 p.m. maybe starting to see a little bit of a rebound in the moisture. Overall, I don't really see it. It looks like all the muggy air is just going to be down into Florida. Even most of Georgia is just entirely out of the muggy air that you can wear for just a couple of days. And a 3-day stretch, we will take that by any means. Now we go into Thursday, where I think some rain chances could be back in the forecast. I threw a 10% on Thursday just because we have some shaded areas that are getting close. You will see that some system over here to the west leading to widespread showers and storms in areas like Arkansas, northern Mississippi, getting into western Tennessee, northwest Alabama. There's pretty good agreement there Thursday around 3 o'clock that those areas are going to receive some pretty widespread rain. But then take a look at this. We flash forward to Friday morning around 5 a.m. This is very early in the morning, so right when we'll be kicking off the show. The European in blue is showing that this widespread rain is going to push over into the state of Georgia, and along with that it would be central Georgia too. But you can see that the GFS in green, not necessarily as confident in that. It doesn't think that the moisture is going to span that far over to the east. It picks up on it over here off the Atlantic coast, but overall, it's one model that's saying this. Now, if this does happen, widespread cloud cover, widespread rain, that's going to do a good job at keeping those numbers a little bit lower, hence why you saw that bump down from 85 to 82 as we go between Thursday and Friday. But still not seeing good agreement as we go into Friday afternoon. The GFS actually doesn't have any rain whatsoever as we go throughout the rest of this week. So if we go with that route and the GFS ends up being right, then we're probably going to remain mostly dry to entirely dry all the way through into the weekend. But then we go into Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon. I know it's probably a big afternoon for many wanting to have college football watch parties. It's the big week in week 1 of college football, whether you're cheering on the Dogs, cheering on the Mercer Bears, the Yellow Jackets, the Eagles down at Georgia Southern. Everyone should have some pretty conducive weather for watch parties or going out to those home games. I know Mercer's in town. Georgia will be at home. Don't quite know about Georgia Tech, but they do play on Friday, I know, against the Colorado Buffaloes. And Georgia Southern, I want to say that they start out the season. So somewhere, or in Statesboro, rather, I should say. But we do have our fair share of cloud cover, so it may be partly cloudy to mostly cloudy. Not a bad thing whatsoever. But then as we transition into Sunday, now the GFS is picking up on the rain chances here pretty widespread across Mississippi, Alabama, and back here into Georgia, and along with that down to the south as you go down into Florida. But this is just the GFS now, so the European is not getting on board with this whatsoever. So it's one model run saying we have widespread rain chances. We don't want to put too much stock into one model run. We'd like to see a lot of agreement before we really tell you that, okay, there's going to be a lot of widespread rain in the area. And that's what we were seeing on the long range models for last Friday and Saturday, and that's what ended up happening. There was good agreement amongst them. We felt confident with upping the rain chances to about 60% a couple days ahead of time. This is anything but certain right now. I probably would bump up Sunday's rain chance in retrospect, now seeing this latest run of the GFS. And then take a look at this. This is kind of interesting right here. It does look like whatever system comes over as we go into the end of the weekend, there might be some form of a boundary, a stationary boundary, maybe the front that has moved through just kind of sits out there in the Atlantic Ocean, and it may try to organize something tropical off the Atlantic coast, and that could impact areas of South Carolina, North Carolina. That's far from certain, but it does look like there's pretty good agreement and some darker shades, some yellows and some pinks that we were taking a look at over there off the Atlantic coast. We'll be keeping our eyes peeled for that and see maybe if the National Hurricane Center is going to outline a potential area of development. But it's a great segue into the tropics talk. We have Tropical Storm Fernan. And yes, Fernan is a relatively weak storm. The good news is it continued to curve up to the north and went to the northeast a little bit earlier than Hurricane Erin did as it rode up the Atlantic coast. It actually went all the way east of Bermuda, and you can see that it's not very strong. It's very minuscule now. It continues to lessen in size. Fernan should not have too much more of a lifespan. Wednesday at 3:30 a.m. is the last timestamp that we have. Now this is the 5 a.m. advisory. Another one will be coming out very shortly, but this is still a fish storm. This is nothing that we need to be worried about whatsoever unless you have a deep sea fishing expedition out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. This isn't going to have any impacts to you whatsoever. So 50-mile-per-hour winds tomorrow morning, and that's what the wind speeds are currently right now, but that pressure above 1,000 millibars, and that's always the indication I tell you about. If you're below 1,000 millibars, that's when you're starting to get your act together, and that's when you're a little bit stronger. But this pressure is already above 1,000 millibars, and only about 6 more millibars until it's at average sea level pressure. And obviously, once you get to that point, it's not even a low pressure center anymore. So 40%, or excuse me, not 40%, 40-mile-per-hour winds by Wednesday, and really early in the morning, and then Fernan should be a thing of the past. So it is our next named tropical storm. I believe this is the 6th one this year. So what about those other areas we were talking about last week? Well, there's only one of them left, and in fact, with the latest update, there's a 0% chance of this wave developing whatsoever. So I thought this would run into a more conducive environment, but there's something going on here in the East Caribbean Sea that is really inhibiting development. There's a bunch of showers and thunderstorms that have just moved over the Lesser Antilles, and you can see your fair share of rain in between South America and Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, getting up into Hispaniola. 0% chance of developing over the next 2 days and over the next 7 days. These chances were at about 30% yesterday afternoon. So we are really seeing this system not really want to get its act together and develop into a named storm. And this is the only area that we have outlined right now by the National Hurricane Center. So it was very active this time last week with even up to 3 potential areas of development, talking about Hurricane Erin. And the tropic season is supposed to be heating up around now, and we saw that last week, but sometimes you can hit just like a week's time frame in the Atlantic hurricane season and not too much activity whatsoever. But that's not to take away from the fact we still haven't hit the peak. And you remember the last couple of years. Hurricane Michael came in the beginning of October back in 2019. And of course, Hurricane Helene last year, that occurred at the very end of September. So just because we're approaching the peak and the tropics are relatively quiet, doesn't mean that we're scot-free and we're going to get out of hurricane season without any impacts. We're still going to have to be very diligent and watch the tropics as we get into a very active month. In fact, September, probably the most active month of them all. But with getting Fernan crossed off the list, the next name will be the G name, and it doesn't look like any wave has the chance of really claiming that name. So that would be the 7th name on the 2025 hurricane season list, and that would be Gabrielle. And then as we go into the second column, we'll start out with Umberto, Imelda, getting into Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, Nestor, and then we'll go into the third column if we do have enough named storms to reach over there. Wouldn't be a bad thing if we don't reach that third column, but overall, it hasn't been terribly active so far, really until the last week of tropic season so far. But like I said, just because we're getting a bit of a late start doesn't mean that they can't wake up and start spitting out systems off the coast of Africa left and right over the course of a couple days. So here's your 7-day forecast. Nothing to worry about tropics wise and nothing really to worry about whatsoever. Your highest chance of rain I have is on Friday, and that's mainly the morning hours as it currently stands. But like I said, we're still searching for more agreement before we really up that rain chance. And like I said, going in retrospect, I would probably throw a 20 or a 30% chance on Sunday now, given that one model does at least have widespread rain, but those chances are still fairly low until we do see good agreement as we go into the long range models. There's nothing really to worry about. Just enjoy this pleasant stretch of weather. If you're a fall weather lover, then you were going to have a treat each and every morning. Make sure you put on your favorite kind of lightweight hoodie or maybe even some sweatpants if that's your cup of tea, and go outside, enjoy that beautiful sunrise because we'll have mostly clear conditions. Pour yourself a cup of coffee. Heck, go ahead and get yourself a pumpkin spice latte. Why not? I know it's a little bit early, but I'm very excited for the fall for one, and I hope many of you are as well. But if you're not really a fan of these cooler temperatures so early, well, good news. The afternoons are still going to be fairly warm. These temperatures in the mid 80s, and they're going to be paired up with less humidity, so it's really going to feel absolutely amazing during the afternoon hours. Not as good as the mid to upper 70s in my personal opinion, but still we will absolutely take this by any means. And then as we go into the weekend, specifically Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we start to see more of an influx in the moisture, so the rain chances might get a bit of an uptick. But let's see how long this stretch does last. We've been showing you this 6 to 10 day temperature outlook very recently, and it looks like we still have a good shot at holding on to these below average temperatures as we go well into next week and past Labor Day on Monday. So that will do it for your extended forecast, running close to my cutoff time. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back here at 10:30 once again tomorrow. And as always, Central Georgia, make sure that you make the most out of these pleasant weather stretches because you know we can run into another stretch that's going to be hot and along with that, going to be messy just like this past weekend. Thanks for tuning in.